Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, joined by JT and Ian Cummings. It's good to see you guys. JT, how you feeling about the Buccaneers and your football life right now?
I'm just trying to make it to the bye week. Just a little R&R, let these people heal up. Still mourning the loss of Mike Evans and his consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. But honestly, I'm not too sad about that because I think the streak kind of overshadows some of the other things he's really great at, like being a top 10 all-time touchdown scorer and getting to his numbers at a very fast pace compared to other guys. So it's sad because I know it's important to Mike, and a lot of the fans care a lot about it. But honestly, I think it opens up new talking points. So it may be a blessing in disguise for me.
Yep. And Ian, where are you in your draft process now? Like, how would you describe that?
Yeah, so, just kind of adding new grades, updating grades every day. The draft is unique in that you have an established knowledge base entering the season, but there's always more ground to cover in terms of new players. So I'm trying to go through that process. It's two-pronged. And then also, I don't know why I waited this long to do this, but I have a subtrait framework, and it feeds into my composite grades. And I decided to put it all on one sheet for each player now. So it's conditional formatting, and there's formulations and stuff, and it goes a lot smoother. So I'm actually pretty excited. I think I'll be able to add players to my board even faster now. So kind of going through that part of it, the structural changes before we get too deep into the weeds with the offseason. But yeah, it's fun. I've got well over 100 players on my board now, and still trying to expand it and just working down the board. That's kind of how we do things. So it's fun. Still a lot of work left to go, but enjoying it.
Cool. Well, and we are here to discuss some corners that are draft eligible for 2026. And the 8 corners that we're going to cover are Jaden Kennedy from Oregon, Kayin Lee from Auburn, Ceyair Wright from Nebraska, Fred Davis from Northwestern, Evan Johnson from BYU, Brandon, do we say that, Cisse?
I think it's Cisse. It could be Cisse.
I'd rather go with Cisse, like cease and desist.
Okay. Brandon Cisse from South Carolina, Hezekiah Masses from California, who's ironically playing right now as we're podcasting.
I think it's Hezekiah.
Hezekiah. Yeah. Thank you. Hezekiah Masses from California. And then we're going to close it out with Chris Johnson from San Diego State. And Ryan Sparks, you're going to be waiting 50 minutes for us to get to Johnson. But the first player up is Jaden Kennedy from Oregon. And we had a little backstage discussion on him. But Ian, what did you see when you watched Jaden Kennedy from Oregon?
Yeah, so Jaden Kennedy, intelligent, versatile. Those are the first 2 words that come to mind for him. For me, played a lot of boundary corner at Ole Miss last year, working opposite Trey Amos. But then now this year, transferred to Oregon, and they've used him in kind of more of a moving role. He's shown that he can play nickel. He's shown that he can drop back into safety if he needs to. And I really like that ability to be technically variable. He can play some press man if he needs to. He can play with more cushion and off man and zone. And, he's shown that he can play in support, nickel too, when you need him to get into condensed alignments. He's not the biggest guy, and that shows sometimes, but I do like how he competes. I don't think he's scared to be out there in those situations. The question for me was ultimately the athleticism, the physical upside. I think for a guy of his size, right, below average overall in terms of height, weight, and length, I don't think he has the most explosive athleticism. I think it takes a while for him to accelerate, and then even then, his max speed is not great. There were a couple times that I saw on film where if he was a little bit late to transition upfield against someone who was pressing vertical, he would lose space pretty quickly, and it was really tough for him to make that space back up. So I think you have a guy who, on my grading scale, scored really highly with agility and twitch. I think he's got fast feet. I think he's got good recalibration. But whenever it becomes a track race, he can struggle. And I think especially at the NFL level, that's where you can get exposed if you're not up to par with that baseline level of vertical athleticism. So I would look at him as a late round PFA type player who, has experience at boundary corner, nickel, and safety. So I know that he's got the versatility that I would want in a rotation, but probably a depth guy at the next level for me. And that's fine. There's roles for those types of players. And I think the value that comes from being able to play multiple spots in a pinch, I think that'll serve him well.
JT, this was and a reminder if you're new to the podcast, JT, this is your first dive into the draft class. So what was your first impression of Jaden Kennedy from Oregon?
My first impression was I liked a lot of what I saw on film. To Ian's point, I did think he was twitch. I thought he was quick. I did think he was willing to stick his nose in there and make plays. But the question I kept coming back to with him is, where does he hang his hat at the NFL level? What is he? He can do a little nickel. He can do a little safety. He's played outside corner, which is great. I love the versatility. But if I'm trying to chart him in somewhere, where do I want him? Do I have him at free safety? He's never shown great ball skills. He's got 2 career interceptions, and they both happened 5 years ago. So I question if I really want him at safety. Is that his best usage? Nickel, I mean, you can be willing to tackle, and I commend him because I do feel like he is willing to tackle, but I also see him as a guy who struggles to bring running backs to the ground. He's kind of a fight and battle and hope a teammate comes and help him out kind of tackler sometimes, especially against those bigger running backs. So I really want my nickels to be physical, capable run defenders. And I don't know, even though he's willing, I don't know that he's going to really be adequate in that area. So I guess I liked what I saw for a college player. I thought it was really fun, enjoyable tape. I just don't know where I would want him outside of special teams.
Okay. That's fair. Next player, JT, what did you see from Kayin Lee at Auburn?
Kayin Lee, a little undersized, 5'11", 180 is the weight I've had for him. But he has all the things I like from an undersized corner. He has easy speed. It looks effortless for him. Quick, fluid. If you're picturing a small corner, you want him fast and twitched up, and I got that sense from Kayin Lee. So those are things I liked. I really like that he plays bigger than his size. So he's got all those positives, those perks that I like in a small corner, but he doesn't act like a small corner. In my notes I have, he's someone who punches above his weight class. So he competes for the ball in the air. He's feisty, and he's willing and able in terms of getting a hand on a receiver at the line of scrimmage. He's able to get that jam in. He's really kind of a pain in the ass if you're a receiver, and I love that as a defensive-minded coach. So I came away really liking Lee. I'm not sure he wants to tackle, so I don't know if he's going to be an inside guy. I mean, all those physical things, those feisty things, those are really more coverage things, not necessarily run defense things. So I view him, even though he's a little undersized, I view him as more of an outside corner, kind of in that Asante Samuel prototype. But I mean, even if he's never Asante Samuel, which I would never project someone to be someone like Asante Samuel unless I'm really high on him. We're talking first round pick. But that prototype can work in the NFL. So I liked Kayin Lee.
Ian, where are you on Kayin Lee?
Yeah, so I was a big fan of him in the preseason. Actually, I was watching Keldrick Falk in the summer, right? And this feisty number 4 corner was really catching my eye. And I watched more and more of him. I ended up getting a grade, and he actually scored, I think, a mid to late day 2 grade from me entering the year. He's pretty much remained there, which I think, especially in this corner class, is a really good thing. He's a fringe top 100 guy for me, just because there's so many players to settle in there, and he could wind up in my next updated top 100. He's a fun player. I know there was the one play earlier in the year where I think he went helmet to helmet, got ejected, and you want the discipline to show. I think sometimes, to Olsen's point, because he's a little bit smaller, sometimes he gets a little reckless trying to play above his weight, right? So you want to kind of hone that down. But as far as coverage goes, he's one of my favorite players in the class. I think he's an absolute gnat in man coverage. I think he's got the foot quickness that you want, the twitch, the recalibrative athleticism, the explosiveness to, go carry his guy stride for stride up to 20, 25 yards plus down the field on the vertical plane. The makeup speed is there. There were some really impressive plays in trail coverage last year, right, where he's able to get his head around and then get his eyes back on the wide receiver's cage and make a really quick reaction adjustment with his arms and hand-eye coordination, showing that to make precise plays on the ball, right? We talk about ball production a lot, right? But there are different levels of hand-eye coordination and reaction speed and getting your hands in the right spot to make the play. And I think Kayin Lee is very, very good at that. And this past week, I think against Missouri, it was either this week or the week before, but Auburn and Missouri played. And literally, I think the first offensive play of the game for Missouri was a sail concept where Kayin Lee was in zone this time. And he was going to carry the vertical, but then he recognized the out route, the corner route, break into the boundary, and he made a really awesome hip transition, clicked and closed instantly, and high pointed the ball better than the receiver and got the deflection. Right? You want him to convert a few more of those to interceptions, but he's feisty, he's competitive. Again, because of some of the tackling deficiencies, right? Especially being 180 pounds, it's pretty easy for blockers to control him when they get hands on him. I'm of the same mind that he'll probably be a boundary primary guy at the NFL level, but I think he can be a very good boundary corner because even though he's a little undersized, he's got the technical variation that I want. He's got the competitive mentality that I want. The ball skills and the athleticism is not lacking either. So I'm a big fan. Definitely not as strong in terms of play strength as some other guys, but a player that if I was in the middle rounds and I still needed a corner who could file into the rotation right away, he'd be top of my list.
Okay. And you've already answered one of my questions, but I was going to state it. So even you said boundary over slot, which was going to be one of my questions. JT, did you have a slot or a boundary preference on Kayin Lee?
Definitely outside corner.
Okay. And that pretty much has to deal with how physical he is, like holding up inside against the running game.
For me, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, nickel is a different position. You're going to have to withstand the rigors of the run game a little bit more because there's a greater chance that bigger blockers are going to be peeling out to pick you off, right? So it's kind of and then also big slot receivers, right, who might be able to outmuscle you a little bit better. So, I think the more condensed space really plays in. You've got to be able to match up physically just a little bit, right? And some guys are smaller, but they're more bulked up. They're a little bit better playing leverage, so it's different. But if you're really light, you have to either have that lean strength or you need to be able to play leverage and play physical. So it's a high bar to clear because it's a really important position.
Okay. So Ian, what did you have on Ceyair Wright from Nebraska?
Yeah, Ceyair Wright was another fun player. I think when we talk about what we're kind of going through, right, which is kind of explosiveness, twitched up coverage athleticism. I think he definitely has that. I really like how when he's planning and driving, he kind of rolls his base back. I think he's really good at sinking his hips to get that additional propulsion, and that's a good thing. I think, whether it's off man or zone or man, he's got the foot speed that you want, the recalibrative athleticism. As far as size goes, he's definitely a little bit lighter. I don't think he has elite length and playmaking reach either. So he's going to have to find ways to, refine his technique to subvert that. And then also, I think the in support, we talk about these smaller guys, they got to be able to play above their weight class or, play more sound with their technique. And I believe he's got a 36% missed tackle rate this year. The tackling with his lacking length and his, lower body density and mass is really, that's a little concerning in support, right? And if we're talking about nickel candidates, if you're inconsistent at tackling, that's something that could rule you out, right? So I would probably have him as a primary boundary guy. But as far as boundary goes, I think Kayin Lee is a little bit better playing the ball in the air. I think Kayin Lee is maybe a little bit more fluid. I think there's sometimes where even Ceyair Wright at his size, he can be a little high-hipped, right? So sometimes he gets snagged on those sharper transitions, but he's pretty explosive. He's pretty springy, and I really like the short area quickness that he comes with. And at the same time, too, I think he's pretty competitive. So a little bit lower on my board, but a player that has the requisite coverage building blocks and the coverage mobility that I would be open to kind of seeing how I can mold that. So that's kind of where I'm at with him.
And Ian, is your grade on Wright draftable?
It is draftable. It is mid to late day 3 right now, but he's above a 7 for me, which is draftable.
Okay. And JT, this was a player that you didn't have a chance to get to, right?
Correct. My week got away from me and I never got back to him.
Not a problem. So JT, what did you have on Fred Davis from Northwestern?
So Fred Davis wasn't my favorite watch of this group. The first thing that jumped out, just kind of looking up his basic things, he's on his fourth college football team, which I have no idea the context. I have no idea, the reasoning. There's a financial aspect to transferring to schools now, but it's a little bit of a red flag when you're on your fourth college football team in 6 years. So that was something that stood out to me as odd. Not bad necessarily, but odd. Something I'd want to look a little more into. In coverage, I thought he isn't the most athletic guy I thought I watched this week. I thought he could be a little bit clunky, a little bit stiff compared to some of these other guys. For me, he's just kind of a depth player. Yeah, he didn't really resonate with me. So I was a little bit lower on Fred Davis overall.
Was your grade draftable, or it was lower than draftable?
See, I'm not someone who grades in that way. I watched all the players and I fill out my board. And when I get to like 250, I'm like, all right, anyone after this is not someone I draft.
Got it. Ian, where were you on Fred Davis from Northwestern?
Yeah, I was pretty low on him too. He not a draftable player for me personally. So UDFA wouldn't really be PFA either. He's long. He's got good lean mass. I think if I was a team, in particular, if I was a team that employed a lot of zone concepts, right? Because I don't really trust his fluidity and quickness to be in man coverage all the time. If I was a team that ran a lot of zone, I would be looking at his frame and the developmental potential that's there, and maybe get him on a UDFA contract. But a lot of the things that I look for, coverage mobility, being able to sink your hips, and the quickness to transition well, sustaining acceleration out of those transitions. I didn't really see much of that ease of motion on film. I saw some delays in reaction that were kind of concerning to me, and the ball production is not really there. I ultimately think I don't know if he has the coverage mobility to hold up at the NFL level. So it would be very scheme specific if it was, but not draftable for me.
Okay, so Evan Johnson from BYU. I know that Clint Ghost, another draft professor, really liked Evan Johnson. But Ian, what did you think of Evan Johnson from BYU?
Yeah, he's a fun player, man. He's a fun athlete, is the first thing I'll say. I was doing some background research, and he ran a 1084 100-meter dash, I think, in high school, which is pretty freaking good. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but generally that gets you maybe mid to high 4.4s, maybe even lower. So he definitely has jets, and it shows up on tape. I think when he needs to transition and make up ground, he can explode, accelerate, and close that ground. Against Colorado, there was some really impressive, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because a lot of times when I see these recovery reps from him, it's because he overset a little bit too much laterally and pressed man and opened the gate too early, right? And gave up space inside. So, you want to see him tighten that up in terms of positioning and angle IQ and press man, but he is fiery. He's twitched up. He's got a ton of energy in his motion, and I really love just the accelerative capacity, right? Like he plants and goes, and it's just 0 to 100 in an instant, just like that. And he's fluid too. I really like how he sinks his hips. I really like how he can swivel and hinge around without losing too much ground. And especially when guys try to commit vertical, he's really good at swiveling his hips and getting upfield without too much delay at all. So I think, the coverage building blocks are definitely there with Evan Johnson, and that's something that I'm a big fan of because you can develop that. That said, I think a lot of the other areas of his game need some refinement. I think some reps where I was hoping to see good route exchanges, there were delays in reaction, or maybe not great positioning in zone. The ball production isn't really there, and I think he can improve his hand-eye coordination, and then in support too. I think he's a little bit lighter. I don't think he has great length for his frame too. And because of that, he can be directed pretty easily. I don't think he's super controlled with how he lines his base and support against blocks either. So a lot of room for refinement outside of the physical tools, but the physical tools are compelling enough that, I would definitely be willing to take a flyer on this guy. And he does score a draftable grade for me, right? So day 3 right now, mid to late day 3 for me personally, because a lot of the playmaking and technical aspects are still developing. But the coverage mobility is there, and I do think when he is in press man, he at least knows how to run mirror motor with guys, and I do think that's a valuable trait to have. So still developing, still building his game, but a really, really good foundation, a really awesome foundation to work with, and one that I would circle probably in rounds 4, maybe late 4, 5, 6.
JT, what did you see when you watched Evan Johnson?
I think Evan Johnson's the one I had the hardest time. I had to watch more of him than anyone else this cycle to really get a grasp on him, because I agree with what Ian said. The athleticism, it pops. Like, he can turn and run, and he makes it look easy. He's got easy speed, not a question at all. He looks very quick, very twitched up. And then there are times when I think, okay, this guy is a star. There's nothing this guy can't do. He can play man, he can play zone, he can, physically he can do it all. And then the next play, the receiver gets away from him and there's separation. And I go back to why, and it's like Ian said, it's a lot of technical things. I don't know if he always has the awareness of when he should do a thing or how he should do a thing. But there's definitely a disconnect, because sometimes there's easy separation and there shouldn't be, because he can absolutely be in that hip pocket physically. There's no reason he shouldn't always be there, because it pops. You see it all the time. And then a lesser athlete gets away from him and makes a catch, or he gets separation to where he could have had a catch if the quarterback got him the ball. So I agree. There's developmental traits. There's a lot to like physically here, but he is not a finished product. He could be a cornerback 2 down the line. He could maybe be a cornerback 1. It depends on how far he goes in terms of his development. I thought his tackling was a little bit of a red flag. Last year he only had 16 total tackles, and right now he has 23. And I know corners don't get a ton of tackles compared to other positions, but I don't know that that's ever going to be a strength of his game. So there are a lot of things I really liked, and there are a lot of things that I don't think are clicking quite yet. So I'd say there's a lot of potential here. There's definitely tools to work with, but you have to get them with the right coach.
Yeah, and I just looked up his missed tackle percentage per True Media. It's around 13.6% right now, it says. So not the worst that we've seen, but definitely room for improvement. Anytime I think you're over 10%, that's kind of the red area where it's like, all right, we need to clamp that down. So I think he's got the athletic tools. He's got a ton of upside. Just still some refinement to undergo on both phases, and that's okay.
Yep. Okay, so Brandon. Okay, now we got to do the last name again. Are we saying it Cisse? No,
I think we're gonna do Brandon Cisse.
I'm going
Brandon
with Cisse.
Yep.
I'm sorry, Brandon. Brandon Cisse from South Carolina. So Randall Slifer has been on this South Carolina corner since coming out of the summer. JT, what did you see when you watched him?
I see good tools. He's 6 foot, 190. I think he can turn and run really well. I think he's a decent tackler. I don't know that he's a great tackler, but it's not a red flag for me. Nothing I saw really was a concern necessarily. I don't know that he's a great athlete. I think he's a good athlete, but I'm not sure he's a top shelf athlete. So that's a little bit of a something that turns me away a little bit and makes me question what his overall ceiling can be. But for me, this is someone I look at as quality depth. I don't know that I ever see him as a starter. I don't see him as number 1. I don't know that I see him as a number 2. But if you need, depth at your outside corner, you need special teams help, he can do everything fairly well. There's nothing that stood out as, I don't like this. This is not good. This is a problem. I don't want this guy on my roster. I had no glaring flags with him, but I didn't really love him either. So I think he's a good rotation piece, a good depth piece to have. Personally, I like taking a bigger swing on corners. I'd go more with the Evan Johnson, the toolsy players who I think have more upside. But I think this is a rock solid depth player for me.
Ian, how about you?
Yeah, I was a little bit higher on him. I ended up having him. I ran a prelim grade. I hadn't had a chance to preliminary grade him yet before I prep for this podcast. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this, right? But I watched a couple games. I want to watch more, but I ended up liking him quite a bit. I think he scored mid to late day 2 for me, and he's in a bucket of corners that's pretty exciting. So I'm eager to grade more, but I was a little more complimentary of the athleticism. I think you don't always see it, and I do think on the vertical plane right? I think his speed is really good, but I don't know if it's elite, right? If there's a receiver who gets an angle advantage on him or gets a step out of his release or out of his stem, if that receiver has great speed, then Cisse might not be able to close that gap. But when he needs to throttle up and attack, I think he's got some real jets in his soles. There was one play against, I believe it was Missouri, where it was a run support play, and he was exploding off the edge to Ceyair around a block and literally just like covered 5 yards instantly off the snap. And that was one that really caught my eye. And then he was able to bend underneath the block and almost make the tackle too. So he's a fun player. I think he's always fast flowing. I love the urgency, the competitive zeal that he plays with. And I honestly think it's not just vertical athleticism too, as far as explosiveness is concerned. I really loved his lateral explosive range and recovery. I loved his reactive athleticism and his coil when he's, using mirror motor to kind of twitch up and respond to movements across from him. And then I think the foot speed is really good too, as far as, recalibrating in space and off band and zone and planning and driving. So really fun player. I think his reaction speed is great. Reaction to stimulus. There were a couple lapses in route recognition or route exchanges, right? Or were instances where I think his role responsibility could be a little bit better. But overall, I thought he was good there too. I think he's really good at managing positioning in zone, and has a good feel for route depth. The biggest thing for me, probably, I would say, in press man, there are lapses with the synergy between his upper and lower body. I think he definitely has room to become more of a feet first player, right? We talk about press man, you got to be able to dictate with your length, but it all starts with the footwork. And I think Brandon Cisse is so eager to make himself felt at the line. Sometimes he'll extend before his base is stable, and sometimes receivers can get a jump on him because of that. So I want to see him be more disciplined with feet first and press man, and then also as a playmaker, right? He doesn't have a ton of ball production, and one reason for that, I think, his eye discipline can improve as far as getting his eyes back around to find the ball. When he's able to do that, I do think he has really good hand-eye coordination. I do think he can rise up and high point and meet the ball, but it's just a matter of balancing the acts of trailing your receiver and trying to stay in their hip pocket, and then also finding the ball. I still think he's learning how to do that. But to me, anyway, explosive, I think proportionally long, I think really competitive and physical, agile, fleet-footed, really good coil and reactive athleticism. And I think there's definitely starter upside here. So I'm a big fan. Probably mid to late day two for me right now. But very good chance he could end up in my next top 100. So I'm very intrigued by what I saw.
Nice. And I think Cisse is there's going to be a lot of people talking about him. One of the things that we notice with draft professors, right? A player like Cisse, he starts being mentioned in the chat because obviously we're draft people. We're looking at a lot of players. And then I think once the season ends, we're going to hear a lot more about him, similar to what you said, Ian, because he'll probably be in a lot of people's top 100.
Hey, Ian, real quick, you said the Missouri game is one you watched and he popped for you?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm making a note to go back and watch that game because that was not one of the games I saw for him. So I'll check him out. I'll give him his fair shake. With
corners in particular, man, it's sometimes, and every game is different. Sometimes guys look like they're moving a little better. Maybe sometimes they're hampered with something. It's difficult. It's a luck of the draw sometimes. But I really liked what I saw there. And no game is going to be perfect, right? But you judge it for what it's worth, and you try and find the positives.
Okay, so did we say Hezekiah? Hezekiah, I'm sorry. Yeah. So I had a 50-50 shot at getting that one right. Hezekiah Masses from California. I want to give a shout out to James Foster. He was the first person I saw mentioning Masses. And then, Ian, I know you had also almost within a day or two of when I saw James tweet about him, I think you had even dropped something in the Draft Professor chat. So, Ian, why do you like Masses?
Yeah, and shout out to James. He does amazing work, and his tweet of Masses was actually what prompted me. I had known of him before then, but it was what prompted me to hey, go to the tape real quick, check this guy out, because there's always at least 5 to 10 names on your mind, right? Sometimes you got to move guys up the queue, and I was glad I did because I liked what I saw on film. I think he's more of a late day 2 player for me right now, but 6'1", 185. He's definitely got the length that some of the players in this class lack. I think overall, aside from a few guys, it's a little bit of a smaller corner class, and that's fine. I think there are a lot of great players, but Masses really stands out with his length, and I think his physically imposing profile, right? And you see him use that physicality time and time again on film. He's not shy about dictating releases, and he's shown that he can use his length to really control guys at the line. I like how he uses his feet first most of the time. I do think there are times where, he'll be a little bit hasty in terms of his extensions. But overall, I think he's got great length and physicality. That profile holds up well. I think he's got the hinge fluidity to make really swift 180-degree transitions off of the line and advance upfield. I think he excels at, despite being 6'1", playing really low in his stance and supplementing that hip sink that you want to see on successive transitions. He's a fleet-footed, energized mover. He's got the short area athleticism and corrective, mobility that I'd want to see from him. And then his reactive athleticism, where he can really play mirror motor well in press coverage. So I'm a big fan of those elements of his game. I do think there are some instances where, and here's the thing, the biggest thing that I have with Masses is the athleticism, I think, because I think he's a pretty sound player outside of that. I think he's got the agility, the fluidity, the length that you want. And he's one of the most prolific playmakers at the catch point in the class. I think for a while there, he was leading the nation in forced incompletions, and you can see his sense of timing, his ability to disrupt at the catch point and play with precision. All of those things are top shelf. And then on top of that, the length, the disruptive radius really stands out. But I don't think he's a high-end athlete on the vertical plane. I gave him a good explosiveness grade, so not great, not elite. I do think he can get superseded off the snap by more explosive players. And then on the vertical plane too, if someone gets a free release or, if they're able to offset him and press man, which by the way, I think he's got good discipline, but there are times when he's baited into oversetting laterally in press man, right? So if he opens the gate, gives them a path upfield, there are times where guys are able to stack him pretty easily. So I think he excels at keeping players in front of him by dictating with physicality, by using his coverage mobility. But I think the speed could be a slight limitation for him, and that's why he's a little bit lower on my board, because he still has room to refine the technique and the timing and the angle discipline a little more. But he's long, he's physical. I think he's really good at being proactive with his physicality to control releases, and then he's a playmaker at the catch point, and he's pretty physical in support too. So I really like what I saw. He wouldn't go past a certain point for me because of the modest athletic limitations, but I think still athletic enough to potentially contend for a starting role, particularly in a press man heavy scheme, is where I would go, because I think that's where he excels stylistically.
And JT, what did you see when you watched Masses?
Yeah, I liked him a lot. A lot of what Ian said. Love his length. He's a little lean, 185, but it's not to his detriment. I didn't think it was a big deal that he's lean. He doesn't strike me as someone like, oh, this guy's too small, this guy's too soft. He's just light, and that's okay. But he moves really well at his size. Just fast, fluid, quick. He makes it look really easy. I didn't have the concerns with his long speed. Maybe I just didn't see a receiver challenge him. The receiver who didn't have the speed to challenge him that way to make it a concern. But so I felt really comfortable with his athletic profile. Thought he did a nice job getting hands on receivers at the line of scrimmage, making them work for everything they got. Ball skills, combined with his length, 4 interceptions this year. Part of me questions if that's a little bit of a flash in the pan because he only had 1 last year and the 1 prior to that, but he's someone who's consistently gotten hands on ball. So even though he hasn't come away with interceptions necessarily, I think he's still someone who has good ball skills and is always going to have his hand in there and being disruptive. So I definitely see him as a guy who can start in this league. He's an outside starter. I don't know that he'll be a number 1, but I think if he's your number 2, I think there's a lot to work with there, and I think he can be a pretty solid starter in the NFL.
Okay. And then the last player, and Ryan Sparks in the chat, hopefully you are still here. JT, what did you see when you watched Chris Johnson from San Diego State?
So the first thing that jumped out to me is I think this is a highly intelligent cerebral player. This is someone, he does a really nice job keeping his eyes in the backfield. He knows when to peel off his man and pursue to the ball. He's very aware of what's happening around him. Some corners, they just dial into their man and they just have eyes on their man, and that's all there is. And they don't really see the full picture. Chris Johnson sees everything that's happening. I think he's a very smart player. So that stood out to me right away. Love the way he attacks ball carriers. Now, this is someone who can be a really good run defender in the NFL. So that's something that I think is very important. I put a lot of weight in that for corners. The one thing I didn't love, I don't know that he's a great athlete. I thought he's okay. He's a decent athlete. I don't think he's a liability to where I wouldn't draft him kind of athlete. But I don't know that he's a great athlete. I don't know how twitchy he is. So I do have a little bit of concerns with his explosiveness, his twitch. I think his speed overall is fine. But overall, there's a lot to like. He reminded me a lot of Kamari Lassiter from last year. I think he's someone I'd put more in like a zone system because I do have those athletic concerns to where I don't know if I'd want him just manned up and just running with NFL level athletes. But I thought Kamari Lassiter was a good player, and I thought if he didn't have those injury concerns last year, I thought he would have gone higher. So, I feel like I'm lower than some people, definitely lower than Draft to the Future. But I think he's someone who can play in the league, and I think he's someone who can, with his intelligence and his tackling and his decent physical tool, he's not a bad athlete. I think he can definitely stick around in the league for a while.
Ian, what do you think of Chris Johnson?
Yeah, so Sparks is going to be happy with me. He's my highest graded corner of the ones that we were talking about today. And he actually scored, I think, a midday 2 for me right now. So my next top 100 update next week, I'll probably have him in my top 75, 85. I'm a big fan of the player. I think, a lot of what JT said, I think it starts with cerebral, really good processing ability. I think his ability to, I think the reactive quickness and the responsive stimuli and press man is really good. But then I also think his vision, his route recognition, he's not, overwhelmed in 2-on-1 situations, right? If he has a corner route over top and then a flat threat, he's really good at playing between those 2-on-1s and managing space and flipping his hips to mirror that. I think, his technical variation is really strong, where he can play press man, he can pedal and use inch resets and off man and zone, and he can play some side saddle too. I was more complimentary of his athleticism. I don't think he has elite explosion. I will say that. I think his initial explosiveness, there were times where initially out of route breaks, it takes him a little bit to gear up. And I think that's because he's kind of, he's listed at, I think, 6 foot, I want to say 185, right? So he's a little bit on the leaner side. But his initial explosion didn't really catch my eye. But I think it's because he's a short strider with really energetic strides. So he's kind of got to build up, kind of like the Energizer Bunny, But once he gets that build up in, then he gets that long speed, and then he can start to cover ground, right? So it's not that initial first step out of transitions, but I think he's got the foot speed and the play pace for it. I actually really liked his reaction, his reactive athleticism, his coil when he's responding to route breaks, and I think his agility and switch, I had a pretty high mark for that personally. So a big fan of the coverage mobility, right? And then the hinge fluidity to just get upfield right away, but then also the swivel fluidity to manage his hip alignment while tracking back in space, right? There was an interception against California that was really impressive to me. I think it was late in the game, and he was in, I believe, zone coverage or off-man coverage with a lot of cushion, and he read this fade. He aligned inside first, but then he read the quarterback going to this end zone fade route, flipped his hips, broke in front of it, and got the interception. And I think that kind of ability to manage space and then make breaks and has enough closing speed to get in front of it, make the play. Those are some of the things that make me really high on him. And then to JT's point, I think he's pretty good in support too. JT mentioned the tackling ability. I would also throw the block take on in there as well. I think for a guy who's only around I think he's going to weigh in around 180, 185. I think he's a little bit leaner for sure. And I don't think he has great proportional length personally. I could be wrong when the official measurables come out. I have him close to average there, maybe a little bit above average, but not elite. But regardless of that, he does a great job taking on blocks. I think he knows how to engage with the length that he does have. And then not only that, but also acquire leverage and kind of set his base. Some guys engage a little bit too tall, a little bit too upright. I think Chris Johnson, he almost looks like, a defense, like obviously he doesn't have the build for it, but he's engaging with a really strong base. The thing that you would see in the trenches actually, right? And he's extending. I think he's able to swim and kind of shed because of that boundary blocks. So that on top of the appealing coverage framework is really appealing to me. I'd say my top concerns, I do think there are times when if he's playing with cushion and a receiver eats up that cushion really quick, he doesn't always know how to play in sync with his feet and with targeted physicality. And because of that, he can be directed a little bit sometimes at deeper stems. And then I also do think he has a little bit more room to be efficient with his plant and drive efficiency. There are times where he has some extraneous motion, some false steps. Iron those out, and I think he'll be a really good football player. So again, I have a midday 2 on him right now, but I definitely see a future starter, and I see someone who can be scheme versatile and end up being a playmaker in the NFL. I was a big fan of his game.
Awesome. So at this point, we've gone through 3 podcasts of 8 defensive backs, and we have 24 players left to podcast on. Next week, we're going to go up a notch. Colton Hood from Tennessee, Jontez Williams from Iowa State, Damari Brown from Miami, Devin Moore from Florida, Zelmar Vetter from Houston, Latrell McCutcheon from Houston, Jabril Rawls from Florida State, and Preston Hodge from Colorado. So, and then we would have 2 podcasts after that. And we're trending. The goal would be to have right after Thanksgiving to have a cornerback big board. So JT and Ian can say, here's their cornerback rankings, and the general premise of Draft Professor is to try to have our positional boards done before, let's say, before the NFL regular season ends. That way, when people are looking for draft content when their team's season ends, they can see a board that's relatively polished from people in the draft community that they respect. So, Ian, how many corners do you have a draftable grade on so far? And the reason I ask is Clint, who we cover corners on Wednesday nights too. Clint already has 40 corners that he has draftable grades on. I'm curious if you're seeing the number as high as that.
I don't have 40 corners graded yet. Shout out to Clint for putting in some insane work. Even I'm not at that sheer number yet. I will say I'm trending toward that. I think I have at least, I want to say, a dozen and a half initial grades on guys on my graded board. And I still have to add these guys to it. I graded them today, and I graded most of them today. And I think I'll have over 20 by that, and I'm still getting through some names too. So it's a really strong CB class. There's so many names that are kind of congested in the middle round range, but then some guys who could rise and maybe get drafted earlier than expected. So it's a strong class with the volume and then also the top end talent. It's a fun group.
And we're seeing that with wide receivers and corners.
Yeah.
As we're going through, right? So we have podcasts that are just going through, and we start with the late round players first for a reason. It's appearing as though we're going to have more than 31 wide receivers with good draftable grades. So wide receiver, if your team needs a wide receiver in a corner, good news, you can find players that you're going to really like on day 3.
For sure.
Yep. Well, JT, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody? Let them know about your Buccaneers podcast and everything else that you do.
Yeah. So all my written work you can find at bucksreport.com, covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Also have a podcast, a Creamsicle Chronicle podcast that goes live Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on the week, at 9:30. And you can find me here every Friday evening on Draft Professors.
Ian.
First off, I got 2 notes. Creamsicle, best uniforms. No convincing me otherwise. And 2, Creamsicle Chronicle is an A1 podcast name. So shout out. I love the alliteration. I love it. You can find my work at Pro Football and Sports Network, PFSN. I just do draft analysis for them. You'll see me post clips and analysis on Twitter. I'm trying to post more and more grades, and we've got some cool stuff in the works as far as, building the big board and trying to make it more accessible down the line once we have enough volume in there. But it's fun. It's always fun adding more clips and adding more analysis to the spreadsheet. And there's still a long way to go. As crazy as it seems, we've covered a lot of ground. There's still so much more left to go, and I'm gonna have a lot of fun doing it with you guys. So it's been fun. But yeah, PFSN, that's where you can find me. I see draft on Twitter.
So if you are watching the podcast and you can give JT and Ian a follow, please do so. So at Draft Professor, we cannot create content like this without JT and Ian showing up once a week. They're watching these players, quote unquote, homework, coming on the podcast and, telling us what they find. So some of the players may already be on the board, but then I and the draft professors will always find new players that we think, hey, we should eval them and do it publicly type thing. So even like next week, Preston Hodge, that was a name that Ian gave me literally about 30 seconds before we went live. So, you give us new names, we will podcast on them. That's part of what we do, with our goal of trying to podcast on every player drafted in rounds 1 through 5. So we're not trying to cover the whole draft, but rounds 1 through 5 is where most good team building occurs. So we're trying to make sure that podcasts cover those players. So for Ian, JT, myself, for the 105 podcasters at the Draft Professor, thank you so much for tuning in, everybody, and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow morning. Have a good night.